My name is Patrick Donnelly, and I'm on a mission to build better leaders. In today's episode, it's my privilege to introduce you to one of the most dynamic, energetic, and inspirational leaders I've ever met, Air Force Chief Master Sergeant retired Gerardo Tapia, or TAP, as he's known to most people. I met TAP several years ago, and I was amazed at the immediate positive impact he had on audiences everywhere we went. Among a host of great stories and lessons that you're going to hear, he's going to recount to you how he was one step away from being ingloriously kicked out of the Air Force. What turned him around? Well, you'll have to stick around to find out. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure you will too. So let's get started with Tapping Out.
It's a real pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much. I keep knocking off, especially in my retirement, milestones and stuff. And for me, this is one of the ones where I'll have to knock another one off my bucket list. I've never done a podcast before, but I'm incredibly honored that even after 9 years of being retired, that you would care what an old airman thinks about what's going on and stuff. So again, it's my privilege to be here. I consider myself a property, like I told you earlier today, of a good friend of mine. I consider myself property of the United States Air Force, so I'm yours for the next hour and a half or whatever time you'll have me.
I'm so grateful, and I'm convinced over the next hour that everybody who's listening to this podcast will understand why after 9 years, you were my hottest commodity.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, I got to tell you, if I'm being honest with myself, when I sit in a big auditorium and I hear the senior leader up on the stage, or maybe I click on a TED Talk and I see some titan of industry who's wowing the listeners with all the things they've accomplished, my tendency is to forget that that's a real person with a story, that there was a journey that went into that. And if on other days when I am thinking about that journey and I'm being petty, I will dismiss that journey as somehow their struggle was probably easier than mine, or their obstacles were less than mine. And, to be honest, it just makes me feel better to lower their achievements. But then there's another part of me that's actually really glad that that's what the audience thinks, because when I think about all the knucklehead things that I did as a young leader, I'm actually quite happy that the audience isn't going back and researching what made that guy who he is today.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in getting into your story, because I've heard you speak, and you have an incredible charisma. You have a magnetism that just draws the audience into you. And I can see it happening. I can see the inspiration happening around the room when you talk in a powerful way. And I would almost guarantee that 90% of that audience, when they see you, they see a guy and they say, that guy was predestined to be successful. But I have the benefit of knowing a little bit more of the story. So I want to take you back to 17-year-old Gerardo Tapia, Airman in the United States Air Force.
Yeah.
And I'd like for you to share with our listeners, when you looked at 17-year-old Airman Tapia, was it a foregone conclusion that you were going to be as successful as you were?
Yeah, the one thing I would tell you is the big answer to that is no, right? So when I was 17 years old, I can remember I walked into a recruiting station on Dyer Street in El Paso, Texas. And I walked in there, and I not knowing anything about the military, I walked in there and I told the recruiter that I wanted to fly planes, and he said, well, you need a 4-year degree for that. He says, but we have other jobs in the Air Force. And I said, well, where do you sign up? But even at 17 years old, and I was 17 years old, and my mother had to sign a waiver for me to even just talk to a recruiter. At that point in my career, at 17 years old, I was already almost a full-time employee at the same time, in addition to being a high school student and stuff, right? I was in a special program where I went to school for half of a day, and then at noon I was released, and then I was able to work until about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening. My mother was a single parent. My dad had already passed away. I had an older brother, a younger brother and sister that were twins, and then I was stuck in the middle. And so I'm working almost full time at that age. Getting off, I'm taking city buses to get to to a hospital where I worked at, and my job at that point and stuff was to make food trays for the patients that were in there. And then I would take the food trays up there and then and clean up, and then a couple hours later start bringing down those food trays. And I can remember that I got off exactly at like 8 o'clock, and at 8 o'clock, if I ran at a full sprint all the way down to the main plaza where all the city buses go, if I ran at a full sprint and I made it, I would be able to take a bus that would leave me 5 houses away from where I went. If I got detained at all, the next bus would leave me 1.5 miles from my house. So with a book bag, after going to school, working, and then running down, about a 1/2 mile to the plaza, there was a lot of times when I could just see the bus that I was supposed to take with their taillights and stuff. And so even like that, getting home at 8:30, 9 o'clock, doing homework, trying to keep up with schoolwork. But even at that point, I would tell you that I already had a little bit of a sense of the real world and stuff, right? Because even, I remember we lived about a 1/2 block from a Piggly Wiggly, and I didn't have a checking account. And so whenever I had checks, because we lived in that neighborhood for such a long time, that the manager of that store said, hey, if you come in here, because we know who you are, if you spend 20% of your check, we'll cash it for you without any type of ID or anything. So even at 17 years old, I'm buying stuff for the house that we need to help my mother, right? Eggs, tortillas, beans, whatever we needed and stuff. And so even at that point and stuff, I was already, I've had a really sense of purpose and stuff because I'm helping my mother as much as possible. But at the same time, I'm already started these really, really bad habits of running. I grew up in a really, really rough neighborhood in El Paso, and I'm running around with some crazy dudes doing sometimes not good things. And so I already had a couple of issues and stuff where I had to get special permission just to come into the Air Force and stuff. So I'm already a hard worker, but a lot of my behavior just didn't match up with what we would consider a prime candidate to come into the Air Force.
I see. So is it fair to say then that all of that changed upon joining the Air Force, and that you became, with this inauspicious beginning and this very difficult sort of awareness of what real life is like, that you joined the Air Force and then you became, that's going to be future Chief Tapia?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is no again, right? So many years later, I used to tell people that I came into the Air Force in 1985, and I joined the Air Force in 1989.
How so?
And so big difference right there, 4 years and stuff, right? So the issue with me is when I came into the military, I would consider that same work ethic that I had when I was 16 and 17 years old, running trays up and down and working long hours, working every weekend. I really kind of brought that into the military and stuff, right? And there was, at that age and stuff, there was nobody that was going to stay longer and outwork me. I loved what I was doing, but man, let me tell you, if there was a circus to be had, I was the ringmaster at a lot of events and stuff, and I got into a lot of trouble when I was a very, very young airman. And at one point in my career, I was just getting ready to get to the point where I would be able to re-enlist. And at that time, you have to remember, that was a different Air Force. They were still taking 70 to 80,000 airmen a year. And if you wanted to re-enlist, it was almost a foregone conclusion. You would just sign a paper and you were up for another 4 years. But at that point in my career, when I was like a month away from that, I had a control roster, I had a UIF, I had already been, no kidding, put in silver bracelets a couple of times and stuff, because I was just that kid still, running around doing some really, really crazy things. And so to be able to re-enlist, one of the things that I had to do was I had to make these 7 appointments, and then they were going to have something that was called a re-enlistment review board, where they would make a recommendation to your commander on whether they thought that you should be allowed to stay in or not. And I can remember I did all of the appointments as I was told, and I'm sitting in there, and they're going down the line, right? It was somebody else's first sergeant, another commander.
This was in front of you. This was
in front of
happening.
me. Okay. In front of me, and I'm in my service uniform, and I'm sitting there next to my squadron commander, and I'm sitting in there, and they're going down the line all the way down to a Catholic priest who called me an a-hole, and I was like, is he even allowed to say that right here? And I could remember my commander saying, just shut your mouth right now. Every single one of them sent him home. He needs to go home. And I can remember at that exact moment right there, I was literally one signature away from being back on my mom's couch, right? And I can remember, oh my God, I'm getting ready to fail at one of the things that I thought I really, really like. I love the people. I love the mission. I love being a part of a team. I had great friends and stuff. I just did not behave, and I was a bad airman.
Well, let me stop you there, because that's really interesting, because you're a super hard worker. You love what you're doing. Why do you think that what you were doing at work and the trouble that you were getting in outside of work, why did those things not sort of hit until that moment?
I don't know the answer to that and stuff, because if I had figured that out earlier, I probably wouldn't have been literally walked to that point of the cliff.
Right.
Right. And it is just one of those things that I had been doing it for such a long time. And so even in high school and stuff, right, when I grew up in a really, really rough part of town, and so lots of fights, lots of, underage drinking, doing all of that stuff. And I just carried that with me and stuff. And it had never really gotten me in trouble until it did.
Right.
And I have a saying, I think I mentioned to you before, that they say that if you hang around in a barbershop, eventually you'll get a haircut. And I was getting a haircut every Saturday. Right. Every Saturday night. And I'm running around doing some really, really stupid stuff. And then eventually it just piled on me. And I am in a lot of trouble.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt on that. So you're sitting in there.
Yeah.
6 of the 7 have said send him home.
Yeah, 7 of the 7 actually.
Oh, 7 of the 7 said send him home. And that's when the reality hit.
I'm done.
Something that I really enjoy, something I really thought I could be successful at. I have failed.
And the worst part of that for me, and this is where to get it, like the emotional part and stuff, was I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna have to stand in front of my grandfather, my grandparents, right, and my mom as a failure. And that's the part that hurt.
Wow. So in the midst of that, all of those things, you're sitting there, literally your future is on the line. You're having these thoughts. What happened? Yeah, so every single one of them said, hey, send him home. He's not worth keeping, send him home. And eventually, and I'll never forget, and I don't know if I haven't seen him in many, many, many years, but there was a lieutenant colonel named Craig McFall. His call sign was Crash. I'll never forget him and stuff. He stood up and he looked at me and he said, you people, thank you for your recommendation, but you don't see him the way that I see him. And I think that he's worth saving. And he signed my reenlistment paper right there. Then he told me, go and get in that closet right there. And I'm like, I don't even know. So he dismissed everybody else. And I'm sitting in there, I say closet and stuff. It was a small little office and stuff, in my service dress. And he walks in, and for like 15 minutes, this guy is screaming in my face. You have so much potential. You're throwing it all away. What have you done? Can we trust you? Can we do it? And by this time, now I'm emotional, right? So I got tears coming down my face. I'll never forget that he's screaming so hard at me that his spit is landing on my uniform. It's just coming out of his mouth and stuff. He's like rabid. And I said, sir, I promise you that you will never regret this. And the next day, I joined the United States Air Force. So. Wow, that's a powerful story. And it's even more powerful given the fact that Lieutenant Colonel Crash McFall, that was his name?
Yeah.
That he signed that before having that conversation and before getting your affirmation that you got it. So that was an act of faith on his part, that signature was going to be something that connected with you.
Yeah, well, it was a promise, right? He promised that he was going to give me a second chance, and right there on the spot, I promised him that I would make everything, that he'd never regret it, and that I would take that seriously, and that I would run with it as far as I possibly could.
So, I've had airmen, I've had employees that have told me similar things, and I'm always curious as to how challenging was it for you to go from being this sort of dual person, hard worker during the day, but troublemaker by night. What were the challenges that went into you joining the Air Force in 1985?
So that's funny, right? Because that's what the next morning I changed my playmate and my playthings, right? And so all of these other people that I had been hanging on with and stuff, I said, this is it. I'm going to start hanging around with people that take this as seriously. And then I said to myself, if this is, no kidding, I told that man he's never going to regret it, but if this is the way that I am going to make my way through life, and this is going to be my profession, this is what I'm going to do, then I am going to give everything that I possibly can to everything that I possibly do. And so from that point forward, I had to come up with an idea on how do I regain the trust of all of the people that I think that I had left down. And I came up with basically some things that I said that I was going to do. The very first thing was I said, I have to get good at jobs that nobody wants. And here's a good example. We used to have a detail back then at Lackland Air Force Base where they would pick 2 really young airmen, and you would go with either a truck or a van full of information. Some of it was classified in boxes, and then you would go to this incinerator at Lackland Annex. And then they would make you turn your uniform inside out, and then you would wear one of those silver suits so you don't catch fire. And then you would throw these boxes in there, and with a 15-foot rake, you would move them back and forth until they were completely burned. And on a good day, it would take you probably about 6.5 hours to burn a truck or a van full of information. Nobody wanted that job. You came back looking like if you had worked in the coal mine that day, black and about 5 pounds of water weight. It was so hot out there and stuff, right? And the minute that they would say, hey, we need 2 I didn't even let them finish saying volunteer. My hand would be up every single time. And whatever job that everybody detests and didn't want to do, I did it with my hand up and with a smile on my face. And I said, that's the first thing is I'm going to have to do things that nobody wants, and I have to be the best at them.
Right.
The second thing that I need to do is I need to take this education piece really serious, right? Because I was a kid that one of the reasons that I didn't go to college was because all of my scholarship offers were lost in the mail, right? So I barely passed with like a C at the very most. And so I was never really into the academics and stuff. And then I said, I am gonna set the example in my own house, and I'm gonna go back to school. And it took me 8 years to finish an associate's degree because I wasn't used to the homework. I wasn't, one math class that I took, back in those days, you had to go into the education office and they would give you a practice exam. And my math skills were so bad that the first 3 classes that I took weren't even college level classes.
They were just to get you to the point where you could take college.
A class,
right.
The most basic one. So it took me a grand total of about 8 years to finish a CCAF degree. Some of these kids today, they have accumulated so many college hours that they're done with their CCAF degree in 6 months or a year. It was 8.5 years for me of hard work doing math stuff until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning when my kids were, coming of age and I was still taking classes. I'm sitting there doing homework with my kids that are in first and second grade, trying to set the example in my house and stuff, and in my duty section about why education is so important.
So I know you've got other points, but I just want to, 2 things you said. I take the jobs that nobody else wants and I get exceptional at those. And then you were willing to take on education when you were, I think, you admit that you were starting way behind and that it was going to be much harder for you to do that. What was it inside you that said, no matter how hard it is, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, so for that, it's easy for me because I think when I got to those where I wanted to feel sorry for myself, there was a lot of times and stuff where I had to overcome some what I thought were obstacles. And I didn't even let myself sit in that environment for more than a couple minutes because I immediately thought of my grandparents. My grandfather and I'm a first generation American, in fact, and stuff, right? My grandfather earned our citizenship by fighting in World War II as a Mexican national.
Okay.
He came into this program and stuff where if you came in and you fought and you were lucky enough to survive the war, then at the end of that, one of your prizes and stuff was your American citizenship.
Right.
So my grandparents and my mother and father, they were all Mexicans. My mom is now an American citizen and stuff. But when I sat there and I was like, man, I really feel sorry for myself because this class is so hard, or I got something new that I got to do at work. I thought about my grandparents. I was like, you have it so easy. You have it so easy.
Right.
And so I never let myself sit in those pity potties and stuff where I'm sitting there thinking about, oh, woe is me and stuff, because I sit down, even when I was like deployed in Afghanistan and stuff, those are rough days.
Right.
You're away from your family. And I was like, man, my grandfather, when he left, he was gone for 2.5 years, came back with almost half a foot.
Yeah.
It's easy stuff.
So having a person in mind that when you were tempted to give up or to feel sorry for yourself, just having this ideal in your mind of what would this person have done, that helped spur you?
Yeah, let me tell you. So I mentioned my grandparents, but nobody influenced me more than my mother did. My mother was, I mentioned, my dad passed away when I was really, really young, and my mom went back to school with 4 kids, single mother to become a nurse. And so when she was, we're growing up next to my grandparents. We're in a duplex. They live on one side, we live on the other one. And my mother worked an 8-hour shift, and if a nurse didn't show up afterwards, they would ask her if she could stay for another 8 hours. So my mom would work a 16-hour shift,
right,
like this, with no questions asked. My grandfather would come and sleep on our side and stuff, so we had an adult in the house.
Right.
But my mom would work 16 hours, and by the time we got home from school, the dinner was already made. And so I said, there's nobody that can work like my mother did. Yeah. And again, so when I sit there and think about, oh my God, we have it so hard, we don't. I mean, not me anyway. So I never let myself dwell into those,
So, I mean, I hate to say that you were fortunate, because all of those things are really hard.
Yeah.
But in a sense, you were fortunate that you had these people that you could look to that set an example for you, even in the midst of hardship. What would you say to a young person who's struggling with a job, who's dealing with adversity, and they don't have a parent or a grandparent like you did?
Yeah.
What would be something that you would advise them to think about in order to sort of rise above that the world is against me mentality?
Yeah, so let me tell you, so I'm a big, huge fan. Many years ago, the Air Force came up with something called the Comprehensive Airman Fitness. That's how you build resiliency in airmen, right? And when I started to read a lot of that stuff, I was like, man, that's stuff that I kind of already do, and I'm a little bit good at it. And so whenever I came across these situations when I had an airman that was, down in the dumps or whatever, or maybe not feeling it and stuff, I would revisit a lot of those, and I would say, hey, try to look at the positive side of things. You're a great asset. You have some work to do and stuff, and I can help you with that by getting you some remedial training, or maybe you need to talk to a professional to get your head straight or whatever it is and stuff. But I was a big advocate for that. And in fact, a lot of times when I was the command chief for AATC, and I would go from schoolhouse to schoolhouse and stuff, and I would sit in there, and not to berate some of those NCOs that were in leadership positions, but I would sit there in a room full of 20 tech school instructors, and I would say, hey, how many of you guys in here are, no kidding, would do everything that you possibly could if you thought you could save an airman? And every single hand would go up, and I'd say, okay, everybody that has their hands up, give me one tenet of the Comprehensive Airman Fitness, and every single hand would go down. And I said, then you're not doing everything that you could today to save an airman. Because if you kept your hand up and stuff, you could at least name 2 or 3 tactics that you had in your tool belt and stuff to be able to help somebody pass this and stuff. So the next time I roll around in here and I ask you that question and stuff, you're going to be able to come back to me and tell me, give me examples and stuff about something that you've done to be able to pick somebody up and help them with.
So the Comprehensive Airman Fitness Program, do you want to share a little bit about some of the key tenets that went into that?
I'll give you one for example and stuff that I worked on a lot. I had a young airman that came up to me one time, and he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, Chief," and I could tell, you're right, because I'm a person that really, really believes in the face-to-face stuff. That's where this stuff happens, right? You looking in somebody's eyeball and saying, "Hey, there's something going on right here." Sometimes it's something that's very, very easy and stuff, right? Like in a good example, I walked up to one of my airmen. He's like, "Chief," he goes, you have a baby, he hasn't slept through the night. He goes, I can barely keep my eyes open. And I said, "Hey, you know what? Today at 1:30, go and take a nap in your car. We'll run out a couple water bottles to you. Make sure that you haven't passed out and stuff, but at least you're going to get about 3 hours before you get home."
Right.
And it's that simple, right? An act of kindness like that. But I had another airman that came in and said, "Chief," he goes, "So it looks like me and Loretta are getting a divorce." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Wow, that's That's kind of hard. There's a lot of changes that are going to happen. I said, do me a favor. I said, I want you to go home tonight, and on one sheet of paper, I want you to write down why you're getting a divorce. And another sheet of paper, I want you to write down why you married this girl in the first place. I said, and then give it 2 days, and we'll come and see me, and we'll talk again. So he comes back to see me, and I said, let me see the paper on why you're getting a divorce. He had like 6 things on it. She doesn't trust me. We're not as close as we used to be. A couple, I can't even remember what they were, but 6 things. So let me see the other page. He had 3 pages of why he married her. And I said, do you see the disconnect right here? How can you have 3 pages of why you married this girl and you can't solve 5 out of these items right here? That's one of the tenets, right, that we use in the comprehensive Airman fitness is being able to find the good part of and being able to decide what's pro and what's con in a situation like that.
So to move out of the immediate emotional and begin to think more rationally about the situation to make better decisions.
Absolutely, yeah.
How important, I don't know if this is one of the tenets or not, but if you were talking to somebody who was struggling and they didn't have the parent or the grandparent, how important to you is finding a mentor or somebody that you look to become that example for you?
So yeah, one of the big things in being a mentor that I have found and stuff that some kind of is an obstacle to being a good mentor is sometimes you go out and subconsciously you will look for people that look like you. Right? I mean, it's going to be somebody that you were maybe from the same hometown, or maybe you have a very similar upbringing that you had. But that's the problem, is a lot of times just naturally we will glide towards people that look like us, right? So for me, it's very easy to go into a room and pick out a young Hispanic guy and say, hey, where are you from? Within about 5 questions, I've already come up to 2 or 3 things that we can both relate to, right?
Right.
And they serve as a point where we can jump off on. What are you going to do when you have to be a mentor to somebody that is your opposite, right? If you have to go in there and maybe you have to start mentoring a young female, maybe a young female that's out of shape, and you don't feel comfortable coming in there and having that conversation about, hey, you need to start hitting. You need to get your jeopardy. You're putting your career in jeopardy. Right. They don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations and stuff because, oh, she's going to think that I'm coming on to her and stuff. And I said, hey, if you did all of the footwork at the beginning, then you can have those conversations in there, calling them in and saying, hey, maybe you and I need to start coming in about an hour earlier. We'll meet at the gym. We'll help each other out and stuff. There's a couple of things that I think you could help me with and I can help you with. And you can have those conversations, but being able to come across and look for people that are your polar opposite, that you have to be the same kind of a leader for than everyone else. It is super, super easy to supervise people that look like you and that are the shiny penny. It is hard, and you're gonna gain your teeth on the ones that need a little bit of help. And how are you gonna connect with them and stuff? You don't have nothing in common.
So, I mean, that's a great point. I think, you sort of mentioned the mentorship from both sides. There's the side for me, the person that's struggling. I need to be out looking for the person who is the person I want to become. Yeah. But then there's also the responsibility going down of I need to be looking for who needs a mentor like me and who might I be able to help. Yeah. And like you say, sometimes you don't get a choice.
Exactly.
Sometimes this is my responsibility, whether I want it or not. This is my responsibility. Yeah. A lot of what you've talked about, we teach a leadership framework that's called Lead, Develop, Care. And the simple sort of summary of that model is that there are 3 things every leader must do to be successful. They have to lead their people, they have to develop their people, and they have to care for their people. And all 3 of those are equally important.
Yep.
A lot of what you've been talking about falls exactly within what we would call that care primary responsibility. How do you get to the point of caring to the point that you're effective without potentially over caring to the point that it's having an impact on the other people you're responsible for or the mission that you're responsible for carrying out?
Yeah, so the one thing I would tell you is that not everybody is the same, right? There's some people that are going to be drawn to you naturally because of, maybe what you represent. Here's the big thing that I used to tell a lot of my especially my young junior NCOs, and then eventually when I became a command chief, And I would tell them something, and I would say, this is exactly what I would say is, your airmen today, whether you realize it or not, are looking at you. And when they look at you, it's not just a sideward glance and stuff. When they look at you, they're looking inside of your soul. And they're seeing what's inside of here right here. And if they don't see something inside of you that they want for themselves, then in a very, very short time, somebody else is going to be leading your airmen. You're going to have nothing but footprints all over your back, and somebody else will be leading, developing, and caring for your airmen without any of your input, right? And so that part for me, the leadership part, I think eventually will come. The development part for me has never been difficult because I've always figured in this team right here, where is it that we want to go, and we can build the steps on what we need to do. And I think that's almost a scientific process and stuff, right? Being able to develop people, making sure that they have the skill sets that they're going to need. But the caring part for me has never been the hard part because I'm just naturally that person and stuff, right? Because I think part of my upbringing, and especially because I was even in the Air Force, the trouble issues that I had. Right, I could come across airmen right now, and I could, if they were hungry, if they were angry, if they were lonely, if they were tired, if they were homesick, whatever it was, I have been all of that.
Right.
I have been that airman and stuff. I've been the one where, man, hopeless, whatever it was and stuff, and I could automatically connect with where they were, right? And I could care. I could tell them, hey, as bad as you think that you have it right here, guess what? I've been through there. And I have survived, and let me show you how I did it. Not only did I survive, but I've thrived on it, right? And I used it as a stepping stone and stuff. So for me, I don't know if you can overly care for somebody and stuff. I think that it develops into different stages and stuff where it's more than just, hey, you showed up for work today and stuff, but now it's like, hey, I want you to be a better person, a better airman, a better parent, a better student. And then from there, it just starts to build and stuff, right? And so, I don't know if you can overcare for your airmen.
Yeah, I get your point, and I think that's fair. I guess I meet young people, young leaders all over the world. We've trained over 1,700 in the last 18 months, and many of them are struggling with this idea of, I care so much that I am pouring so much time into this particular person that I find I'm unable to care for everybody else on my team adequately, and it's really hurting the morale of the team or the functionality of the team, and we're no longer able to complete the mission that we've been required to complete because I'm pouring so much energy into this person. So I agree with you. I don't think you can necessarily overcare, but you can allow care to get out of balance to where it is having a negative impact on everybody else that you're responsible for. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So and I immediately, as when you were kind of describing that a little bit further, I thought back to when in my own personal career where I felt like maybe, like you said and stuff, you're the one that's pouring too much resources or whatever. I had a situation and stuff where we had an airman and stuff that needed a lot of help, and so one of the things that I did, I said, hey, this is an opportunity for some of her co-workers to be able to step up and give her what I would have provided and stuff, right? And instead of me just abandoning it or pulling it back, what I did was spread it around.
I see.
Right? And I said, hey, this is our vested interest right here, and it's all of us now.
This is our brother or sister or teammate, and we owe it to this person.
It's not just me. It's not just me, and not only that, if we succeed, you're going to be better for it yourself because you're going to get some lessons right here on what a leader has to do certain times and stuff. And sometimes it's, adjusting the right of her behavior, which might have some negative connotations for her. But what I did was I spread that around to several other other NCOs and senior NCOs. And sometimes it works and sometimes it didn't and stuff. This person was better off as a civilian.
Right.
And so I would tell you that even at that point, it was still a victory for us and stuff because these guys did a lot of work and stuff that they themselves were better for it.
That's a great example of, I have a task that needs to be done, and the task is this person.
Yeah.
How can I, in the process of caring for this person, how can I further develop other people around me And so you're taking people maybe who aren't in your official formal leadership role,
Right.
and you're bringing them into that so that they are gaining experience in terms of a job that they are going to have.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you are both caring for the person and developing your team at the same time.
Yeah. I used to do this when I was an MPF superintendent. I hadn't even put on chief yet. And we would have a monthly, not monthly, twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would come in a half hour early. And we would just talk about, hey, this is some training stuff that we need. And I would open up every one of those meetings with just some notes that I thought was observations, things that we needed to do. But then I would turn it over to one of my young airmen, and I had already made a schedule for them. And I'd say, hey, what I want you to do is the next 5 minutes are going to be yours right here, and I want you to brief us on something that you think is important. And what it's going to do for you is you're going to have to do a little bit of research right here. If you need some topics, I'll give them to you. You're going to have to do a little bit of research, do a little bit of prep work, and then I want you to open it up for questions and stuff. And hey, if you get stuck, throw me a lifeline and I'll come in and help you a little bit and stuff. But you're going to, they at first they were like, oh, Jesus, the little public speaking in front of 30 or 40 people. I don't know if I could do this and stuff. But you know what? It was already building them, right, to be NCOs at one point and stuff where they've already had experience coming up and doing a little bit of research. It could be something as simple as, hey, how does tuition assistance work for the Air Force and stuff? But I gave them topics all over the place. And these really, really young airmen and stuff, man, they started to, I could see the development are there over, we were only together for about a year and a half before I had to go out and do something else. But I could already see that, like, some of these guys are destined for bigger, better things.
Right. So that what you just said reminds me of a quote that we often use, because to be honest, when it comes to any of those three things, leading, developing, or caring, when I ask what makes that hard, those three terms are pretty simple. We all understand them.
Yeah.
What makes it hard? And inevitably the answer that comes back is, I don't have time. I'm too busy. I've got too many other things. I don't have time to be intentionally leading, developing, and caring for individual people on my team. And so the two questions that you have to ask is, what task has to be accomplished? And the second is, who can be developed while I'm accomplishing this task? So in effect, you merge the two things together. I have a task that needs to be done.
Yep.
As I'm doing that, who can I draw into my team to be developing them in the process so that they are more capable and I am now freer, in a sense, to focus on other things?
Yeah, absolutely. I got a valuable lesson that was presented to me by a first sergeant one time. So now I'm the command chief at Holloman Air Force Base. I have, I think, 17 diamond-wearing first sergeants that I'm their functional manager for at that base and stuff. And I had already in my own mind figured out what I was going to do to develop them. I mean, because they all go to the same school and they get the basic foundation of what a first sergeant does, and then we assign them to these different squadrons and stuff. But I didn't want it to end right there, right? So what I wanted to do is I went in there and I briefed them and I said, hey, I've never been a first sergeant. I've never carried the brick, but I've sat next to you, the first sergeant functional, for 4 years at the Pentagon, and I helped write your AFI and stuff, and I want to be personally vetted in your development right here. So I'm going to give you this plan of something that, it was a lot of milestones that they were going to have to hit right on their own. And I'll never forget and stuff, because of all of the movement that I did at that base and stuff. I had a lot of really, really good, very good connections with a lot of young airmen. And I can never forget and stuff that I told them, hey, I have an open door policy. If you ever come in, you have a problem that affects the wing, come in and see me, we'll talk about it. And this airman came in, and I can't remember what it was. It had something to do with the dormitories and stuff. And I said, hey, let me take care of that and stuff. And I got had a phone call. This first sergeant actually came in, knocked on my door, and came in to see me. And he said, Chief, he goes, that's one of my airmen. He goes, I don't mind that I like the fact that they have enough trust in you that they're going to come in here to see you. But why don't you give me a chance to work on this? And I said, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I'm hands off.
Yeah.
This is yours to work. If you need for me to push you across the goal line, I'm happy to help. But you're absolutely right and stuff. I had discounted all of the work that I had put into this group of people.
Right.
And they were some smart folks. Let me tell you, a lot of them are command chiefs today. Smart folks and stuff. But I'll never forget that conversation that I had with them. And they said, "Why don't you let me try?"
Yeah.
I said, "You're there then."
That's such a great story, because the culminating event of these workshops that we do, requires them to come up with what is a current leadership challenge or opportunity that they're currently facing. And then we use our model and they work through our model to figure out, can I arrive at a better solution than what I've been doing using this different framework? And inevitably, 80%, I review every one of those challenges or opportunities that they write down. And I would say 75% of those would be something like, Master Sergeant writes on their form, there's an airman in my team, there's a young person in my team that's really struggling with this, and they're really terrible at this, and their habits are bad in that, and I've got to figure out how to motivate this person. And my first question to them is, are you their supervisor? And they say, no, there's a staff sergeant, and then there's a tech sergeant, and then I'm that person's. And I said, your issue isn't the airman. Your issue is the tech sergeant.
Absolutely.
How do you get your tech sergeant to do their job so that the staff sergeant does their job and so that the system works? It's so tempting, I think, especially for guys like you who are, man, I'm going to fix problems.
Yeah.
I care. I'm going to fix problems. Would you say there's a temptation oftentimes, I'm going to jump down a couple of lanes and I'm going to fix that problem myself instead of investing in the guy that needs to be fixing that problem?
So let me tell you, for me, that was a very, very, I could jump to that guy that can fix things really, really quick because of the jobs that I had, right? So before I became a command chief, I had already worked for 2 of the chief master sergeants of the Air Force. I had worked at AFPC, doing assignments. I was very, very well versed in a lot of AFIs, right? And it goes back to like what I said. If this is gonna be my job, I'm gonna do it to the very best of my. So if there was an AFI to learn, I had a paper copy. It was already yellowed over, sticking out of it and stuff. I knew how a lot of things work. And when I got to that point in my career, it was very, very simple for me to be able to pick up a phone and take care of a problem like that.
I could just cut through all this.
I could cut through the whole thing, but you're absolutely right. Because if I didn't give those guys an opportunity to grow and really at the end of the day to be the hero to that guy, right? It's not going to be me all the time and stuff. Let me help you, but you're absolutely right and stuff. And it goes into, no kidding, being able to grow that. Eventually, when you're a command chief, you're in charge of the entire enlisted force, right? That you have your interests right there, and you should be concentrating on a lot of bigger things than trying to fix an Airman First Class's pay issue. Right. You have a lot bigger fish to fry. The things that are happening in the dorms, the funding, being able to develop first sergeants, your NCOs.
You're focused much more strategically at that point.
And I realized at that point and stuff, at the end of the day, if they struggled and they needed for somebody to kind of step in and they're just looking in the wrong spots, calling the wrong people, looking at the wrong AFIs, let me help you with this. I'll straighten it out. We'll get it going and stuff. But it was easy for me at that point in my career to be able to fix a lot of stuff and to know when something wasn't being done correctly. But I would have robbed a lot of those really, really young NCOs of the opportunity to really kind of grow and to be able to be a role model for that.
Right. In the end, they may not have been able to solve it as quickly, but they would have been developed in the process of being a more effective supervisor long-term by giving them a chance to wrestle with that.
So let me just share something that I did and stuff, because at that point, I'll never forget this. So I go into, I'm the command chief at Holloman Air Force Base, and within a week and stuff, we go into the NCO because they were going to make an announcement on who was getting promoted. And I forgot what grade it was to. But so the guy gets up and he talks and he says, hey, he goes, we're here to celebrate the guys with the puffies. There's added responsibility. They're going to get promoted. And they said, hey, the promotion rate for the Air Force, the worldwide promotion rate was 22%, and Holloman Air Force Base was at 18%. And so congratulations and stuff. And I just, that stuck me in my head. And I'm like, okay. So the next promotion cycle comes around, and I find out that we're like 3 or 4 points underneath the worldwide and stuff. And my boss at the time, he's now retired General Harigian, right? I worked for him when he was a colonel. He asked me if I had anything to say. And so by this time I had already done the math. And so I come up to the stage right here, and I said, hey, congratulations to all of the guys and stuff that have the puffy sleeves. You're going to get a little bit more pay, a little bit more responsibility, rah, rah, rah. I said, and the rest of you guys, you should be ashamed of yourselves. And nobody knows where I'm going with this, right? They're like, what in the world did this guy just say? I said, the rest of you guys in here, let me tell you something, because this is a war-fighting base. I said, we have 5,000 people at this base. Out of those 5,000, 500 of your brothers and sisters are downrange today, and they're giving everything that they have. I said, and our families come in here and they sacrifice just like everybody else. Our NCOs work hard. I said, so I think you would agree that we're not an average base. We're above average. I said, but if we had been an average base, at the end of this year, we would have had 120 more promotees than we did. So we're going to start working on that. And I came up with a plan on how we're going to do this, and I about 5 or 6 things that we were going to focus on, and I went in there to see my boss, and I said, boss, I said, I have this document right here that I'm going to call the Enlisted Force Flight Plan. I said, because we live, and for me it was easy to sell because we're at a base that has F-22s and there's planes taking off every day. I said, there's not a single pilot that gets in that plane without filing a flight plan. And when he lands, he's going to compare what he did in the air against the flight plan. Did everything work? Did he have anything issues or whatever and stuff? I said, we are going to come up with a flight plan for our enlisted force with about 6 or 7 goals, and we're going to attack them. One of them was how fast you complete your CCAF, your CDCs, your promotion rates, right? Your senior and your PME levels of graduation. And we put this all together, and I went and I sold it to the chiefs and the first sergeants. The wing commander says, Tap, I like this, we're doing it. We're doing it, and not only are we doing it, now these squadron commanders are going to be, we're going to put
held responsible, right?
We're going to put a green, yellow light thing up there.
Right.
Guess what? The next year, I'm sitting at the NCO club for an announcement and stuff, right? And they're like, hey, the worldwide promotion rate to this was 22%. Congratulations, Holloman Air Force Base, you're at 31.
Wow. That's amazing. That's an amazing story for a couple of reasons. But the thing that story really illustrates for me, and really everything that you've said illustrates for me, is that we often say the most critical word with effective leadership is intentionality. I think many leaders, we assume that we're leading well. We talk in generalities, and maybe we look at the output, and based on the output, we assume that we're leading well. But in reality, we don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
That's not guaranteed. Everything that you've talked about is, how do I become more intentional about either developing myself, about caring for other people, and about developing my force so that we are achieving the mission more effectively? But it takes thought. It takes real thought, real effort, and it takes accountability.
Yeah, so let me tell you how I did this, and one of the reasons that I called it the ticks on the wall. I said, because, there, as a command chief and stuff, you're going to go into your commander's office in January, and you're going to say, hey, boss, we had a great year. And he's going to ask you, Chief, how did you know we had a great year? And you're going to tell him, hey, well, we didn't have, any DWIs. We didn't lose anybody in combat, and we did this or whatever and stuff, right? And he's going to maybe pat you on the back or whatever. I said, it's another thing when you walk into your boss's office and you say, hey, boss, we had a great year. He says, Chief, why did you have a great year? And I said, because we were measuring certain things, and now we have unequivocal qualitative data that shows that we grew in this and rate. Just like when you're a kid, and you go and you mark yourself on the wall, and a year later you can prove that you grew 1.5 inches, right? Yeah. And I said, we are going to have ticks on the wall right here at this base right here, and this is the stuff that we're going to start to measure, so that when I go in and I tell the boss that his wing, our team, had a great year, and if he asks me why, I'm going to show him, hey, we came up in our promotion averages. Our kids our young airmen and stuff are getting their CCAFs a year faster than normal. Everything that we're measuring is the development of all of our people right here, right?
Right. Yeah, so coming up with, how do I know? It's funny, sometimes I go to bases and I'll train a group of junior leaders and then a group of more senior leaders. And the longer you've been in, the more skeptical you become, especially if the topic is leadership. Sometimes I'll be in a room full of, from the wing commander, the group commanders, and all the SELs for those units, the senior enlisted members for those larger groups of people, more senior people, 18 years in, whatever. And as I start talking about leadership, I can see them all fold their hands, and they start like, oh boy, here we go. I already know all this. And sometimes that's what they'll say is like, we already know this. But 2 days prior, I was training the younger leaders in the wing, And at the end of the training, I'll say, what would you like me to take to your wing leadership? And they will say things like, why doesn't my chain of command know this stuff? And it dawned on me that it's not about what you know. It's about what you're doing.
Yeah.
I can know all the right principles. I can have all the right answers. I can score the right questions on the test. But if I'm not doing them, it's only by doing them that my younger supervisors know that I know them.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about, again, is that intentionality. If someone were to ask me, how do I know? I can give them 5 or 6 reasons why. I know this because.
Yeah.
I know I'm doing this because.
Yeah.
Not just, well, nothing happened. Nobody's crying.
Yeah.
We didn't get any DUIs.
Exactly.
Those are proving a negative.
Exactly.
You want to prove a positive.
Right. So I'll tell you, a really good example of that and stuff. So when I was stationed at Tucson Air Force Base, I was the command chief for 12th Air Force. Loved that job. And I'm sitting in there, and every single time that they were making an announcement for who won the John Levito at the NCO Academy. So the John Levito's at the leadership school that we had there on that base.
And just for the audience, that's the top graduate in each of those classes.
A PME, professional military. Everybody knows John Levito. I'll tell you a good story about him later. But so I'm noticing, because I study people, and I hear things, and I put them in my repository. When I used to carry a book, and every time that I heard a really, really good saying, I'd write it in the back, and I'd say, one of these days I'm going to say that, make myself look really, really smart. But I noticed that at all of these functions and stuff, when they're getting ready to announce these John Levito and these great airmen, it was always from this squadron that we had at Tucson that was called Compass Call.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with the mission and stuff, right? So I said to myself, why is it that every single time that we're getting together as a base and they're running all of these airmen from Compass Call on there, what do they have in that squadron right there that is lacking in maybe some other of these units and stuff?
Right.
And so I'm the command chief for 12th Air Force, so I said, guess what? I'm doing a base visit, and I'm going to go, and I want to spend the entire day with the Compass Call.
Yeah.
And so I go in there, and what they had going on in that squadron, I wish I could have put it in a bottle and then sent it around the entire Air Force. I'd be a rich man today. But at the end of the day, it was NCOs holding other people accountable. All the way down from, hey, every daily checks, how are you doing on your CDCs? When is your next exam? Do you need any help with this? Their OJT program, absolutely on target. And then their senior NCOs holding their NCOs accountable, that were holding airmen accountable, and airmen holding other airmen accountable, saying, we are one team right here. We had a very, very unique mission. I think you have to get vetted in to get into that squadron because of the mission set that they had. So they already had smart kids and stuff, but it was a lot more than that. They had already made that connection right there, right? And that's the reason when we're sitting there together, and it's one airman after another from Compass Call, and I'm like, what they have right here. And I told my other command chiefs, you better go and spend the day over there and figure out what's going on. Yeah. Because these guys, they're winning everything. And how is that?
Well, how was it? I mean, one of the things that I think oftentimes organizations don't do well is encouraging a culture where people hold each other accountable to standards. Yeah. It's uncomfortable. It feels intrusive. It feels like I'm being mean. Maybe there's a sense of who am I to tell you, whatever it is. There's a million reasons we don't do it. But it is uncomfortable. And some services do it better than others. Some organizations do it better than others. But what was it about that unit that was able to inculcate a culture that said, this is who we are?
Yeah. Well, I think what happened from day one when they got into that squadron is they sat somebody down and they said, everything that you learned in basic training, everything that you learned at your tech school, everything that you learned in PFP is practiced right here every single day. You're not going to come in here and call your supervisor Johnny. You're not going to go out there drinking beers in the dormitory and stuff. This is a unit that has very, very high standards, and we're going to hold you accountable for that. I luckily, when I was in so much trouble as a very, very young senior airman, I happened to actually work in a squadron like that. It was a very, very unique squadron. I had to get vetted to get in there. And the reason for that was because they were part of basic training, and that's where they did the classification piece of basic training. And I was in a squadron that had, at the time, 35 Silver Star recruiters, right? So every single recruiter that went in there and said, hey, can you wiggle your fingers? Do you have any speech? They were the top of their game.
Yeah.
So from a very, very young age, I was already exposed to a bunch of recruiters and a bunch of NCOs that had really, really high standards. They were out there doing the heavy lifting for the Air Force. And so even as a young senior airman, and again, when you mentioned, what did that Lieutenant Colonel see in you, what he saw me at that point and stuff was a kid that came in here that had his uniform razor sharp, that had never needed a haircut, just so, heel and sole on your shoes, the uniform pressed. I was the senior airman of the wing for 1 year because I felt special in that squad, and they had a really, really unique mission. We were the compass call back then of Lackland Air Force Base.
Right.
3507th Airman Classification Squadron and stuff, PME winners, John Levito winners.
But I'm thinking, and I think this is where you're going, that those were special units, but any unit could become that.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating because I think just, the quote that I mentioned earlier by Cloud, in the end as a leader, you have what you create and what you allow.
Yeah.
The only thing that's keeping any unit or organization from becoming that is because they have chosen to allow a lower standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've said this many times, whatever you allow in your presence is your standard.
It is your standard.
You could sit up there and say that, hey, you have really, really high standards and stuff, but and it could be a number of anything, like showing up for work late, your uniform looks horrible, whatever it is, you don't give the extra effort right here when you're at work, your lackadaisical, whatever you allow in your presence without speaking up is your standard.
Yeah, and I know we're getting short on time. Yeah. I could talk to you for another week, but to close out that story, I think sometimes we feel like I'm somewhere in a larger organization, and my larger organization doesn't value it.
Yeah.
So it's wrong for me to expect something higher from the people that I supervise.
Yeah.
But I would say that I can't control necessarily what's going on above me, but I do have control over the people that I supervise. And every individual leader can inculcate that level of professionalism and excellence, even in a team that's a larger dysfunction. I can be that shining star.
So you remember, I mentioned that I've been carrying notebooks around for the last 20 years. The last 5 pages of every single notebook I left open when I heard and I saw something that I felt like I should probably put them all in one book and stuff, right?
You should. Yeah.
I remember my good friend, Chief Master Sergeant Mike Curver, was the command chief of AMC back in like 2004, 2005. He said something one time that made it into the back of my book, and he said, if you think that you're small and insignificant, try and sleep in a room with a mosquito one night.
Yeah, that's
Can't
good.
Do it.
Right.
You're going to get up.
Yeah.
That's it. You're much bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because maybe you're in a small and insignificant seeming role, you can have an outsized impact.
Absolutely.
For you. Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, before we go, and I'll just make this the last thing. Are there one or two key traits or thoughts that you'd like to share with young leaders out there, military, civilian, industry, wherever they are, on a sports team? Are there one or two things that you would just say, boy, if I was going to concentrate on two things, this is where I would put my money?
Yeah, so, I spent a lot of time with General Rand, right? He was my boss at multiple locations and stuff, but I'm studying people, right? And I've seen him connect with people and stuff on many, many different levels. He has a different way of doing things and stuff. He has one of those memories and stuff where if he met you today and he asked you a couple of questions, maybe, hey, how are your kids? And you told him your little girl plays the violin. A year and a half from now, when he sees you again, he's going to walk up to you and say, hey, how's your daughter's violin? Right. He just has that capacity. I don't have the same. I remember people and stuff. But the one thing that I would tell you is that he's very fond of quoting the coach for the Green Bay Packers, the Lombardi, where he said, "Hey, this is my team right here." He goes, "I don't like every single one of them, but I have to love them." And to me, that is a very, very profound thing and stuff, right? To be able to say about some of your airmen and stuff, you have to be able to open your heart and care, like you said, till it hurts sometimes, right? I use this analogy a lot of times and stuff by the time I was a chief master sergeant, and I have been married to, I found the woman that I decided I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. We've been married for 35 years, but when I was a chief master sergeant, I felt like I had been divorced 7 times, right? Because I had walked those paths and stuff with my airmen. I felt like I had been, pitching in for diapers and baby milk when my kids were already teenagers, right? You have to be able to care on a level and stuff where good things are going to happen, right? And sometimes you might not see the immediate result of those fruits and stuff, but many, many years later, when those people circle around and just drop you a note on Thanksgiving saying, Chief, how are you doing?
Yeah.
How's the family and stuff? And you know that you connected and stuff. And if you can do that with as many people as possible, I guarantee you that the mission is going to take care of itself, because they're going to come in and they're going to go in there and they're going to give you everything. Here's the other part and stuff, and I used to tell this to a lot of my command chiefs. There are going to be thousands and thousands of airmen today that show up for work and they give you everything of themselves. Some of them will be working out at Luke Air Force Base in 115-degree weather, sweat stains all over them, oil on their face, and they'll go home and nobody that day had stopped and say, thank you for what you did.
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes we're busy.
Yeah.
We discount that and stuff. I was the guy that ran back out there and said, hey, then put my arm right, man, I'm so happy that you're out here, you're part of our team and stuff, because I would never walk past that, right? They're going to give you thousands and thousands of airmen will go home today, and nobody would even have acknowledged that they came in and did what they did, when many of them have given everything of themselves. They made that choice, like I did many, many years ago, that they're going to come in here, that the Air Force is going to be the way that they're going to work their way through life, and they're going to give everything that they possibly can, and nobody that day is going to acknowledge that effort.
That's an amazing story. I think if I was going to sum that up, I would say, in my language, lead, develop, care. Care is the thing that enables successful development and leadership. It's the thing that binds those people together so that they can be developed and they can be led in a way that's more effective, because they know you care about them.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Building Better Leaders. If you'd like to learn more about the Doolittle Leadership Center or the leader development workshops we deliver all around the world, please visit us at www.afa.org/DLC. Helping you become a better leader is our passion and our purpose.